Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14, presented by Bearded Iris, here to discuss Kentucky's basketball game in the NCAA tournament with Kansas State. Kentucky gets here by knocking off Providence. Kansas State arrives after beating Montana State on Friday night. Like, how are we feeling about this one? Kentucky is a small favorite in this one, and two teams that are ranked back-to-back in KenPom in the low 20s.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that this would be a very sort of pick'em type game. I think it just, as always, I think it depends on what you're getting from both teams, and obviously for Kentucky, yeah, I mean we talked about it in the reaction video. I thought that they, again, it was their starting five that did all the work basically, and that they obviously had Frederick and Collins played a couple minutes off the bench, Ware and those guys too, but I just think, yeah, I mean, it was the kind of performance where we've talked about it, like Kentucky stars each have strength, those strengths that other players on the team don't have. And, for Sheboy, that's rebounding. For Reeves, that's hitting shots. And, Toppin, that's just a consistency, I think. Wallace at the point guard position. And, as we said, Livingston, someone who's given them some stuff as well here down the stretch. So I really liked what I saw from Kentucky in that. And I think that gives you confidence in them heading into this game, because the first game is always the pressure packed one. And now, theoretically, you're the underdog as the 6 seed against the 3 seed, although, the spread doesn't see it that way, because I think this is a Kansas State team that, beat Montana State by 12. Again, we talked about it. They've got guys, whether it's Noel, whether it's Keontae Johnson. We talked about Desi Seals. Tomlin had 13 points in 21 minutes last night, 6'10". So, yeah, I mean, I think Kansas State has the makeup of a team that can really, put some pressure on Kentucky here. And they shot 70% last night from 2 against Montana State. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is, you don't become a 3 seed for no reason. I mean, Jerome Tang's done a great job. We talked about him a lot this season, even though they don't play in the SEC. We just said, look, that was one of the better coaching hires out there. And you just kind of see how they play, the one area they struggle in. And we kind of preview this a little bit in the reaction video, but they tend to turn the ball over. And I think that's something for Kentucky. Kentucky is going to have more size. Kentucky's not really a team, though, that turns the ball over a lot. That turns teams over a lot defensively. If they can find a few of those extra opportunities, use the size of their advantage, I don't hate the matchup at all for Kentucky.
Kentucky, you mentioned consistency. It feels like we know we're going to get from Oscar Sheboy. It's double-digit points and rebounds, although I guess last time out he went 8 and 25, so just missed the double-digit points, but went off in rebounds. Jacob Toppin's been a double-double machine. Cason Wallace, when he's been healthy, has been so consistent. But I think the key to Kentucky right now is Antonio Reeves, Blake. Listen to the last few games going backwards. 22 points against Providence, 22 against Vanderbilt, 37 against Arkansas, 14 against Vanderbilt, 21 against Auburn, 16 against Florida. He hadn't really scored like that most of the season. And now I feel like he's sort of an every night fixture in that offense, whether it was maybe he or Frederick at some point. Now he's kind of taken over as the guy. And when he can give you that big a scoring punch, Kentucky's awfully tough to beat.
Well, that's what I said in the previous video. It's just that Kentucky has a guy that can go off at any time. I think we may have said that in the Providence preview. When you have a guy that can go off and score 10 points in a span of 2 minutes, like that's Antonio Reeves. Like, he can do that. Like, he has that capability, and there's not a lot of guys out there like him that can just completely change the game as quickly as he can when he's making shots. And I think the Arkansas game was, sort of that standout game where you saw it. Played 40 minutes. Guy was, ridiculous from the field, 37 points. But that's there. I mean, you can even go back to some of the other games he's had this season, right? I mean, I think the game at Ole Miss was one of the ones that stood out. He's had some of those games where he hit shots, and for Kentucky, that's exactly what they need from him. They need a guy that can make baskets when they find themselves in a stretch where, look, maybe Sheboy's not getting the opportunities. Maybe Cason Wallace isn't hitting shots. They need a guy that can step up and just make a shot from anywhere on the floor, and I feel like that's what Antonio Reeves can do. And so, yeah, I mean, he's going to be a challenge here for Kansas State. I mean, it's a good defensive team. They defend the three well, but Kentucky's not a team that's just overly going to rely on that. We know Kentucky's bread and butter is going to be able to, try to attack the rim and either kick out to Reeves for open shots, get some mid-range shots for a Livingston or a Toppin. But you do have someone in Wallace who can attack. And of course, you also know the formula, Chris. It's throw the ball up there and just let Oscar Tshiebwe go get it. Just let him get an offensive rebound because they're one of the best in the country at that. And I think that's an area in this game where Kansas State's really going to have to work hard to limit those second chance opportunities for Kentucky, because that's the big part of it. Where Tshiebwe had, was it 11 offensive rebounds last night? Yeah. So if they give up that amount of offensive rebounds, Kentucky's going to win this game, because I feel pretty confident sort of in how they're going to be able to approach this one, because I don't look at Kansas State necessarily as one of those teams that's just going to completely overwhelm you on the offensive end of the floor. To me, it's going to be kind of all about what they can do on the defensive side here.
What concerns you from a Kansas State standpoint? I mean, this is an old team. You've talked about Keontae Johnson.
There you go.
Desi Seals.
That's what concerns me, is they have two guys that are elite playmakers in Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel. Like they're playmakers. And I think anytime you have two guys like that leading the way, these are two guys that average 17 points a game or more. And so I think that's what scares you for Kentucky, because again, when you get to this point in the tournament, you need guys that can just take over. You can't just necessarily rely on hoping to get a little here, a little there. Like when you're down, if it's a 4-point game with 2 minutes to go, you got to have that guy you can go to. And we always say that in the tournament. And like I just said, Kentucky has that, but so does Kansas State. I mean, they've got two guys that can go off and make big shots. And so I think that's what concerns you a little bit if you're Kentucky. You've got a point guard who, is in pretty much complete control of what they want to do offensively in Noel. And I know somebody say, well, he's 5'8". It doesn't matter. Watch this guy play. Like he's very, very good. And then of course, Keontae Johnson, we've seen, the evolution of his game over the years, just from whenever he was at Florida. And now you see kind of what he's done this season, and he's a tough guard. I mean, he's a tough guy to guard. And so I think that's it for Kentucky. You want to see them, which I think we saw that in the Providence game, right? We've said this season, one of the things with Kentucky, our focus early on in the season was on the offense. And we're like, man, this offense just is not, it's not there. Like they are not doing anything different on offense. But we said, man, their defense started to slip a little bit. And I think that's where, look how the game against Providence played out. Go back to the game they won. Oh, I don't know. What was that, against Tennessee? Held Tennessee to 54. Tennessee's a team that struggles to score. That's well discussed at this point. So I think it's just, how Kentucky defends those two guys in particular, because that they are, what drives their offense. And that's not the takeaway. I talked about Tomlin earlier. I mean, you've got a guy, again, that's not a big team, right? But think about this, like that's not a big Kansas State team. But, I think just looking at it from that standpoint, like they're going to play, like we said, Noel's 5'8", Keontae Johnson 6'6", Desi Seals 6'2". But I mean, Tomlin's 6'10", whatever, 215 or whatever he is. So you can't just say that they have no one that can do things, because he can. But if you're asking what's the biggest thing that would worry me, it's those two guys, and just the fact that I think Kansas State's a pretty good defensive team. But I don't know, like a lot of teams, Chris, they've lost some games away from home this season and haven't looked great in some of those. So yeah, like there's a lot of interesting, and that's why I think this is basically a pick 'em, because I just think you've got stars and playmakers on both sides. It's just who wins out in that scenario.
Okay, I had Kansas State in my Elite Eight before the tournament. I always like to just stick with what I did unless there's a really good reason not to. So I guess I'm going to stick with Kansas State, but I don't feel great about it, honestly. I mean, I worried part of my not picking Kentucky here was how Kentucky would or wouldn't be ready for Providence. Kentucky answered the bell there. So I feel like now that Kentucky's in the tournament and having played one game well, probably I feel a little better about the Wildcats than I did, say, a week ago, where I thought they were, I don't know what the word is, but you and I saw them up close in Nashville in the SEC tournament. And I had some questions about the Cats leaving that game.
Yeah, well, we know a Wildcat's going to advance here. And I think I told you, when we saw the initial bracket, I said, to me, the first game for Kentucky is what tells us a lot about how far they can advance. And boy, it's really hard to doubt. Like I just talked about, the ability of Noel and Johnson. That's a really good combo there and what those guys can do. But I don't know, man. I think I'm leaning Kentucky right now because I look at what Sheboy can do to completely change a game and take over. Even when Kentucky's not perfect, they weren't perfect against Providence, but when you got a guy that can snag 25 rebounds in a game, and you've got a guy like Antonio Reeves who can make shots consistently, and he started to do that a lot more now, right? There was a time there where that wasn't necessarily the case. But he scored double figures. He scored at least 14 points in the last 6 games.
It's probably been averaging 20 over the last 6. Yeah.
I mean, so he's had at least 22, 22, 37, 14, 21, 16. There's only really, you go back to it's been a while. Like it's been early in the season. There were a couple games in there where it was a little up and down, but really he started to become just a consistent shot maker. I think if that continues, I think Kentucky's got a great chance to win this game. And look, these are the kind of games, Chris. What do we talk about? Kentucky is leaning on 5 guys, right? They're leaning on the burger place here. And what does Kansas State do pretty well? They get to the free throw line. So, that's another aspect I think you look at in this game is if Kansas State is in attack mode, which they're going to get more of their points inside the arc than they are outside the arc. If you just look at their numbers, 4-15 from 3 against Montana State, 7-30 the previous game against TCU. They got a 4-21 against Baylor in there, 4-20 against Oklahoma, 6-26 against Texas Tech. So it's not a team I think that you're going to just look at that's going to just rely on the 3. They're going to attack Kentucky because if you get one of those 5 in foul trouble, where Kentucky kind of sits right now, that can significantly change what the Cats can do. So that's another thing I didn't mention earlier, but that would be another thing that would concern me a little bit if I'm Kentucky. You really cannot afford to get a Sheboy in foul trouble, really any of those first 5 guys. Not to say that, Collins or Ware or Frederick or maybe Wheeler, we don't know, can't come off the bench and give them some minutes, but I think they're going to go, like I said, as far as those first 5 guys can take them. And I just think that they've got to be disciplined on defense, knowing that you've got a point guard that can do a lot of things, and you've also got a really nice playmaker in Keontae Johnson. So I think it's a pick 'em. I think it's just I would be surprised if this is not a game that's decided within 5 points. I would fully expect it to be that way with these 2 teams, and I don't know. I think Kentucky's got a shot here. So.
We'll be here to recap it when it's done. Best way to catch that is hit the subscribe button. You can get notified when we make videos. We're doing everything throughout the NCAA tournament involving the SEC previews, recaps. So that helps. That helps us get noticed. Helps fund my cold medicine, which I'm in dire need of right now. My goodness.
So Kentucky fans,
you in the middle of
if
March.
Kansas State wins, just blame Chris and say his pick, his bracket pick, was the cold medicine talking. It wasn't anything
right.
else, so
right. All right. We're just having some fun here. Thanks for watching. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. We'll see you.